The phone buzzed for the third time in less than an hour. I glanced at the screen without picking it up. It was my husband, Richard. Or rather, the man who had been my husband for the past 38 years. Each call made the diamond on my finger feel heavier, more like a shackle than a symbol of love. I was sitting in my attorney's office, the kind of place I never imagined I'd be at this stage of my life. The mahogany desk between us was covered with papers, documents that would unravel nearly 4 decades of marriage. My attorney, Jennifer, a sharp woman in her 40s, looked at me with concern. "You don't have to answer," she said gently. I smiled, a bitter thing that didn't reach my eyes. "I know." The buzzing stopped, then started again almost immediately. 4th time, Richard was persistent. I'd give him that. It's one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, back when that persistence was directed at winning my heart, not destroying it. "Let me tell you how this started," I said to Jennifer, pushing the phone aside. 3 months ago, I couldn't sleep. You know how it is at my age. Some nights, sleep just doesn't come. It had been a Tuesday night, unseasonably warm for October. I'd gotten up around 2 in the morning, thinking I'd make some chamomile tea. As I passed Richard's study, I noticed the light was still on under the door. That wasn't unusual. Since he'd retired from his consulting job 2 years ago, he'd become a bit of a night owl, said he was working on his memoirs, whatever that meant. But that night, I heard something that made me pause. A laugh. Low, intimate. The kind of laugh you don't share with just anyone. I should have knocked. I should have announced myself. Instead, I stood there in my nightgown, my hand hovering over the doorknob, listening to my husband tell someone named Ashley that she looked beautiful, that he couldn't wait to see her again, that leaving his wife would be worth it for her. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It starts as a cold spot in your chest, then spreads like frost across glass. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, listening to my husband plan a future that didn't include me. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream or cry or throw things. I walked back to our bedroom, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. And then I started planning. The next morning, I made Richard his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. I asked him about his day. He kissed my forehead and told me he had a golf game with some friends from his old firm. I smiled and told him to have fun. Then I called my friend Margaret, who'd been my confidant since college. She'd gone through her own divorce 10 years ago, and she'd warned me then that I needed to protect myself financially. I'd laughed it off. Richard and I were solid, I'd thought. We'd built a life together. "I need the name of your attorney," I told her. Margaret didn't ask questions. She just gave me Jennifer's number and told me she'd be there if I needed her. That's how I found myself, 3 months later, sitting in this office while my phone buzzed with increasingly frantic calls from my husband. Because today was the day Richard thought he was going to sit me down and ask for a divorce. The day he thought he'd walk away with half of everything we'd built. What Richard didn't know was that we hadn't built anything together. I had built it. Every single asset we owned was in my name. The house, the investment accounts, the rental properties, all of it. Let me back up. When Richard and I got married 38 years ago, I was finishing my MBA. I came from money, not absurd wealth, but comfortable. My parents had set up a trust fund that matured when I turned 25, which was 3 years into our marriage. That trust gave me $250,000 in 1987. That was a fortune back then. Richard had been charming, ambitious. He had his consulting job, made decent money, but I was the one with capital. I was the one who suggested we invest in real estate. I was the one who found our first rental property, a duplex in a neighborhood that everyone said was too risky. "Let me handle the investments," I'd told Richard. "You focus on your career. We'll build wealth together." And he'd been happy to let me. For 38 years, I'd managed our finances. I'd turned that initial $250,000 into a portfolio worth over $3 million. The house we lived in, the beach condo, the 4 rental properties, the stock portfolio. I'd acquired all of it. I'd negotiated every deal, signed every contract. Richard's name wasn't on a single deed. He'd been so busy with his career, with his golf games, with his networking events. He'd never bothered to look at the paperwork. He just enjoyed the lifestyle my investments provided. Jennifer had been thorough. She'd helped me document everything. We had copies of every deed, every investment account statement, every piece of paper that proved what I already knew. Richard had no legal claim to any of it. In this state, Jennifer had explained to me during our first meeting, assets acquired during marriage are typically considered marital property, but there are exceptions. Assets held in one person's name only, especially if acquired with separate property like an inheritance or trust fund, can remain separate. You've been meticulous about keeping everything in your name. As long as Richard didn't contribute to acquiring these assets, they're yours. He contributed his salary to our living expenses, I'd said. Which is not the same as contributing to asset acquisition. You used your trust fund and the proceeds from your investments to buy everything. He lived in the houses you bought, but he didn't buy them with you. It had seemed almost too easy, but Jennifer assured me that the law was clear. I'd been smart, even if I hadn't been trying to protect myself at the time. I'd just been efficient. Why put both names on everything when I was the one doing all the work? My phone buzzed again. 5th time. I picked it up this time. Hello, Richard. Where are you? His voice was tight with irritation. We were supposed to have lunch today. I'm running errands, I said calmly. I'll be home soon. Well, hurry up. We need to talk. I'm sure we do. I hung up before he could say anything else. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. He's ready to have the conversation, I said. And you're ready too. I nodded. I'd been ready for 3 months. 3 months of playing the perfect wife. 3 months of swallowing my anger and my hurt. 3 months of watching my husband text his girlfriend under the dinner table, of listening to him make excuses for why he needed to run errands or visit old colleagues. I'd met Ashley once, actually, at a charity event 2 months ago. She was 29, worked in marketing, had the kind of confidence that comes from being young and beautiful and having no idea what real heartbreak feels like. She'd smiled at me, shaken my hand, told me it was nice to meet Richard's wife. Richard had been nervous that night. He'd hovered, tried to steer me away from Ashley, but I'd been gracious. I'd complimented her dress. I'd asked about her work. I'd watched her relax, watched her think I was just another middle-aged woman who posed no threat. If she'd looked closer, she might have seen something in my eyes. But people rarely look closely. He thinks Ashley loves him, I told Jennifer. He thinks she's willing to build a life with him. And you don't think she is? I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. Ashley loves the idea of Richard. Successful consultant, early retirement, nice house. She thinks he's wealthy. She has no idea that every penny we have is mine. When he shows up at her door with nothing but his pension and Social Security, we'll see how much she loves him then. Jennifer smiled. You're not just divorcing him. You're educating him. I prefer to think of it as helping him understand the value of the life he took for granted. The papers were ready. Jennifer had drawn up everything. The divorce petition, the asset declaration, the temporary restraining order that would prevent Richard from trying to claim any of our property. All I had to do was serve him. I'd chosen to do it myself. I could have hired a process server, but I wanted to see his face. I'd earned that much. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I'd say. But when I pulled into the driveway of our beautiful 4-bedroom house with the view of the mountains, the house I'd bought 15 years ago with proceeds from selling our first 2 rental properties, all my prepared speeches evaporated. Richard was waiting in the living room. He'd set the scene carefully. 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table. He was wearing the cashmere sweater I'd bought him for Christmas. His expression was serious, almost sad. "Thank you for coming home," he said. "I know you're busy." I sat down across from him, not next to him. I didn't touch the wine. "We need to talk," he said. "I know." He took a breath. "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I want a divorce." I watched him. Really watched him. The man I'd loved for 38 years. The man I'd built a life for. The man who was now trying to leave me for a woman young enough to be his daughter. "All right," I said. He blinked. "All right?" "Yes. All right. If you want a divorce, we'll get divorced. You're not going to fight me on this?" "Why would I fight you, Richard? If you're not happy, you should go." He looked almost disappointed, like he'd wanted more of a reaction. "I've met someone," he said. "I know. Ashley? His face went pale. How did you... I've known for 3 months, Richard. Since that night you were on the phone in your study, telling her how beautiful she is. He had the grace to look ashamed, but only for a moment. Then you understand. I'm in love with her. This isn't some midlife crisis. It's real. I'm sure it feels real. We want to build a life together. She's young, vibrant. She makes me feel alive again. And I don't. You're a wonderful woman, he said, and I almost laughed at the patronizing tone. You've been a good wife, but we've grown apart. You have to admit that. What I'll admit is that you're ready to move on. So let's discuss terms. He looked relieved. I think we should split everything 50-50. It's only fair. We built this life together. Did we? Of course we did. This house, our savings, everything. We'll each take half and start fresh. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope Jennifer had prepared for me. I set it on the coffee table between us. What's this? He asked. Open it. He did. I watched his face as he read through the pages. The divorce petition. The asset declaration showing that every single thing we owned was in my name. The documentation proving that I'd acquired everything with my own funds. The bank statements showing that his contributions had only ever covered living expenses, never asset acquisition. This isn't right, he said, his voice shaking. This house, these properties, they're ours. They're mine, Richard. They always have been. Your name isn't on any deed. Your name isn't on any investment account. You've lived in my houses, enjoyed the returns on my investments, but you own none of it. But we're married. It's marital property. Not when it's separate property acquired with separate funds. I've consulted with an attorney. Everything I own, I acquired either with my trust fund or with proceeds from investments I made with that trust fund. You're entitled to half of your pension and half of your Social Security. That's it. He stood up, the papers falling from his hands. You can't do this. I'll fight you. I'll get a lawyer. Please do. My attorney would be happy to explain to your attorney how community property laws work in this state. The house you're standing in? I bought it. The car you drive? I bought it. The money in our checking account? Mine. The rental properties generating our monthly income? Mine, mine, mine. I lived here too. I contributed. You contributed to living expenses, which I appreciate. But contribution to expenses is not the same as contribution to acquisition. I've been very careful, Richard. For 38 years, I've been very careful. He was shaking now, rage replacing shock. This is vindictive. You're doing this because I fell in love with someone else. I'm doing this because it's my property. If you'd wanted to leave me and had a legal claim to half, I'd have given it to you. But you don't. You think you're leaving me for a better life. What you're actually doing is leaving me for no life, no house, no investment income, just your pension, which won't be enough to maintain the lifestyle Ashley has grown accustomed to expecting. She loves me. She loves what she thinks you have. Wait until she realizes you have nothing. I have my retirement savings, which amounts to about $120,000. Nice. But not enough to buy a house in this market. Not enough to support Ashley's taste for luxury vacations and designer handbags. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You've become cruel. No, Richard. I've just stopped being convenient. You're served. You have 30 days to move out of my house. I'd suggest you make other living arrangements. This is my home. This is my house. There's a difference. You can take your personal belongings, your clothes, your golf clubs. Everything else stays. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know. Maybe Ashley has room for you in her apartment, or maybe you can find a nice one-bedroom somewhere that your pension can cover. I stood up, leaving the papers on the table. I'll be staying with Margaret for the next week while you make arrangements to leave. The locks will be changed on the 15th. If you're not out by then, the sheriff will remove you. And Richard? He looked at me, his face a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. Don't contact me except through my attorney. We have nothing left to discuss. I walked out of my house, got in my car, and drove to Margaret's. It wasn't until I was safely in her guest room that I let myself cry. Not for Richard, not for our marriage, but for all the years I'd wasted on a man who'd taken everything I'd built and considered it his due. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and cold efficiency. Richard hired an attorney, a hungry young man who thought he could intimidate Jennifer. He was wrong. Jennifer calmly presented document after document, proving my separate ownership of every asset. Richard's attorney eventually advised him to settle. Richard tried calling me directly 17 times. I didn't answer once. He sent emails that ranged from angry to pleading to pathetic. I forwarded them all to Jennifer without reading past the first lines. Margaret was a saint. She let me stay with her, brought me tea, listened to me talk when I needed to talk, and left me alone when I needed silence. She'd been through this. She understood. The hardest part, she told me one night over wine, isn't the legal stuff. It's accepting that the person you loved never really existed. Or if they did, they're gone now. She was right. The Richard I'd married, the one who'd been ambitious and charming and full of dreams, he'd disappeared somewhere along the way. Maybe he'd been replaced gradually, so slowly I hadn't noticed. Or maybe he'd always been this person, and I'd just been too in love to see it. On the 14th day, Richard's attorney called Jennifer. Richard wanted to talk to me. He wanted to negotiate. Tell him there's nothing to negotiate, I said. He can take his personal property and go. He's asking for the beach condo. I laughed. The beach condo I bought 10 years ago with proceeds from selling a rental property? Absolutely not. He says it's where you two spent your anniversary every year. He has emotional attachment to it. He can visit the area on vacation if he's feeling nostalgic. The condo is mine. Richard moved out on the 13th day. He took his clothes, his golf clubs, his books, and a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to his parents. Everything else stayed. When I returned to the house on the 16th day, it felt larger somehow. Emptier. Yes, but also more mine than it had ever been. I changed the locks myself. It felt good, physical. Each turn of the screwdriver was satisfying. The divorce was finalized 60 days later. Richard got half of his pension in the settlement, as required by law. I kept everything else. The judge had been very clear. Separate property remains separate property. Richard's attorney had tried to argue that I'd made him believe the property was jointly owned, but Jennifer had phone records showing that I'd sent him monthly updates on our finances for years, all clearly showing my sole ownership. He just never bothered to read them. I heard through mutual friends that Ashley left him 3 weeks after he moved into his one-bedroom apartment. Apparently, she'd had questions about where all his money was. When he explained that his wife had owned everything, that he'd left the marriage with essentially nothing, she'd been confused, then angry, then gone. Richard called me after that. I answered. For the first time in months. You were right, he said. His voice sounded tired, older. She didn't love me. She loved what she thought I had. I know. I made a terrible mistake. Yes, you did. Can we talk? Maybe we could work this out. There's nothing to work out, Richard. We're divorced. You made your choice. I chose wrong. That's not my problem anymore. I still love you. No, you don't. You love the life I provided. There's a difference. I hung up. He didn't call back. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sold the house. It had too many memories, too many echoes of a life that no longer existed. I made a substantial profit. I bought a smaller place, a beautiful condo downtown with a view of the city. Just enough space for me. I traveled. I'd always wanted to see Italy, Greece, Japan. Richard had never been interested. He'd preferred golf vacations and cruise ships. So I went alone, or sometimes with Margaret. I discovered that I liked traveling solo. I could eat when I wanted, sleep when I wanted, spend all day in a museum if I felt like it. I dated a bit. Nothing serious. A few dinners, some pleasant conversations. I wasn't looking for another husband. I'd done that already. Now I was just enjoying the freedom of being myself, answering to no one, building a life that was entirely my own. The last time I saw Richard was at a charity event 2 years after our divorce. He looked older, diminished somehow. He was there with a woman closer to his age, someone he introduced as his girlfriend. She seemed nice, practical, not the type to be impressed by false wealth. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was well, which was true. He asked if I ever thought about our marriage. I told him sometimes, which was also true. I thought about it the way you think about a house you used to live in, with some nostalgia, maybe, but no desire to go back. I'm sorry, he said, for how things ended. I'm not, I replied, and I meant it. Because the truth was, Richard leaving me was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to see clearly, to stop building a life for someone else and start building one for myself. It taught me that love without respect is worthless, and partnership without honesty is just cohabitation. I'd spent 38 years being someone's wife. Now I was just myself, and that, I discovered, was more than enough. As I drove home that night from the charity event, past the house that used to be ours, through the city I'd learned to navigate alone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly. Something better. Peace. The kind that comes from knowing who you are, what you're worth, and what you won't settle for anymore. My phone rang. An unknown number. I didn't answer. I'd learned that lesson well. Not everything deserves your response. Not every call needs to be answered. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose silence. Choose yourself. Choose to keep moving forward without looking back. The light turned green. I drove on.